Welcome friends to this, the second Linefeed magazine haul, and it's a special edition this time. As we've reached 2014, this is a chance to look back on the previous year, and I've picked 13 mags that I think, some are personal faves, some are just mags that I think were significant over the last 12 months or so. So hopefully it's a real mixed bag, stuff you agree with or you've seen, stuff that you might not have seen and want to check out, all sorts of bits and pieces. Now this is the second of the mag haul videos, and I was going to start with news, which I'm still going to do, but because I'm doing these every 2 months, it's a little problematic in terms of freshness. So news is now just a chance to look back on some of the things you might have missed over the last couple of months. So without further ado, let's move on to the news section. Mag news for this January 2014 edition of the Linefeed Mag Haul include, last time we said Pitchfork was producing an iPad app and ditching the idea of going into print. We were half right. They now have a weekly iPad app, but also have launched a quarterly print journal called the Pitchfork Review, which in Australia it's prohibitively expensive. One issue would cost over $50. It's quite odd. Other news, sad demise of Fire and Knives magazine, which helped spawn like a whole raft of like amazing independent food magazines. So their legacy will endure for a long time, but it's sad that the magazine that sparked a lot of this sort of amazing cacophony of food magazines has decided to call it a day. They were going to release an annual special edition for just for subscribers, but they're not even doing that now. They're just closing up. So sad news, but like thank you at the same time. Terry Jones has left ID magazine, the magazine he founded and started back in 1980 and has been sort of at the helm of for all that time. They recently sold the title to Vice, and it seems that Terry and Trisha Jones are retiring from the actual magazine, so the next issue is going to be very interesting. It'll be the first one sans Terry Jones since they started. Other news? Oh, this is local news. Motto Melbourne. Motto is a magazine distributor. They have stores in Berlin and they have an outlet in Melbourne, which was recently robbed. And a posable sort of Kickstarter style campaign was sort of put online to help them get that money back. And they managed to make back their month's worth of earnings plus more through the generosity of people via Unposable. So yeah, magazine, like people really want these places to survive, and that's solid proof. And our last little bit of news is that New York Magazine have decided to decrease the amount of copies they produce a year, going to a sort of roughly fortnightly kind of thing. So whereas some magazines are doing really well, others are still sort of having to trim back, and American magazines tend to be quite over bloated anyway, so it'd be interesting to see what happens, whether this is successful for them or not. And that's the sort of what's happened in the last couple of months newsy bit thing for this edition. We're going to get on to the reviews next. This edition is a little different because we're reviewing pretty much the whole of the year in magazines. So this is, we're going to get through 13 mags to sort of sum up 2013, starting with the Gourmand. And I'm still not sure I'm saying that properly. Gourmand? How else would you say it? Gourmand? I don't know. This is one you're probably familiar with if you're a mag geek like I am. It's just pretty much there's been a swell in food-related magazines and sort of presented in a really interesting way. And it all started with Fire and Knives, which sadly called it a day this year. So I feel really a bit sad about that, because Fire and Knives magazine seemed to have spawned a whole raft of these amazingly written, elegantly laid out food magazines that didn't rely solely on sort of recipes and how-tos. Although it's interesting to note, a lot of these new food magazines, the recipes are creeping back in. And indeed, the Gourmand has like a few pages of recipes at the end. There's also a magazine we'll talk about later called Gather, which is pretty much mostly recipes, but also sort of beautiful photography. This is a worthy successor to Fire and Knives. I'm kind of sad that Fire and Knives has gone, but it makes me really happy that the Gourmand is around, because the articles are really diverse, and they're accompanied by just really slick art direction and design by David Lane, and I think his partner? I can't say partner properly. It's a really strange word to get wrong. And yeah, it's just really rich, and it's odd actually, because I didn't buy the previous issue. I feel like the issues sort of so far, there's only been 4, but they've been sort of a bit one off, one on. But I'm really happy to keep checking out Gourmand. I think it's great, and definitely sums up 2013. As does Bloomberg Businessweek, and has done for the past couple of years under the art direction of Richard Turley. There's a few sort of, Jennifer Daniel was possibly a key member of the team, and she's moved on to the New York Times, although the issue we're looking at here is my favourite for the year, and it's back from April, or back in April, so she might have still been around. But this is the how-to issue. It's kind of hard to get hold of copies in Australia, which is something I'm really surprised that they haven't sort of wanted to tackle. There's a lot, freight is probably the biggest problem. But we do get a lot of the specials. They seem to make sure we get the special issues. This one, however, never turned up on the newsstands over here. I had to order this one through eBay, so I ended up paying way more than the really cheap cover price of $5 US. It ended up being something like $30 or something. Just frankly a bit ridiculous. But I had to have it. Look at it, it just looks so great. The sort of stuff that's gone on with the type, like this lovely crunched up type, it's just so of our times, unlike a lot of the sort of retrogressive design that's going on at the moment. I think it's so easy to look at a lot of the sort of indie, popular indie titles and sort of think, well, they're referencing sort of the 70s or the 1800s or, the 50s. And it's very rare that someone tries to be actually modern, which is why Bloomberg Businessweek is so amazingly designed and why it gets so much attention as well. Mainly, I think, because people aren't trying to be modern. This is the end of year special, which is always worth checking out, and I just thought I'd throw it in at the end there because it's well worth a look. And it's sort of, I was saying like a lot of these magazines are retrogressive. This one's actually sort of the Bloomberg Businessweek Designs team's version of like one of those sort of cheesy yearbooks you get when you're a kid or something like that. So it's sort of looking back, but at the same time, look at it, it doesn't look like anything that's happened before. It's just, it's that really thing, looking back to move forward. It's just a really modern title, and it's very rare to find titles that are bothered to be this modern anymore. For this issue too, it's really interesting to see they keep commissioning new versions of the typeface, which was designed for them, which is based on Helvetica. So they've got an agate version, which is made for the tiny little numbers and stuff like that. This is that's sort of a brief overview of my favourite covers for the year. There's so much to talk about with Bloomberg Businessweek, it's really hard to fit it in. Now this, I feel a little like I shouldn't have put it straight after Bloomberg Businessweek, because I think this is like pretty much the only example I've found of possibly the influence of Bloomberg Businessweek on other titles. And I really like it. MIT Technology Review. It comes out, I think, every 2 months. It might be bi-monthly. I don't think it's monthly. Maybe it is. But unlike Bloomberg Businessweek, it's not weekly, so they have more time to think about layouts and things like that. And in the case of this particular issue, they've commissioned like a whole sort of interesting range of illustrators to illustrate ideas about privacy. And they're really diverse, like from Anthony Burrell to Felix, can't say his name, moving swiftly on. But I think you can see the influence, particularly in the choice of illustration, of a more anarchistic sort of style like Bloomberg Businessweek, where there is an idea of being modern and throwing things around the page and trying things, like really just trying things. Although you get the feeling with the MIT Technology Review, this is a good example of sort of the influence of Bloomberg Businessweek. And I've spoken about how they use the same sort of version of Helvetica and all that sort of stuff before. But this is if this is the influence of Bloomberg Businessweek, then it's a much cleaner, more considered, because they have more time, obviously, less energetic sort of version. And I love too that they end on an archive page about previous issues, because they have such a rich history. MIT Technology Review, been around since forever. I've sped this video up. Maybe I shouldn't have. I was worried about the whole thing being too long, but I'm running out of breath. This is a magazine I've put in because I've actually bought just about every issue this year. It's a really odd layout, which I don't think is a bad thing for a graphic design magazine. I think it's quite good to be challenging. Obviously, I've designed a graphic design magazine before, and I found being challenging. But there's an interesting thing happening with idpure where it is really sparse. It's all sort of black and white and sans serifs, but the way the typeface is slightly odd, and the way things are laid out is slightly odd, just to throw you off a bit, I think. And I love that. I mean, I really think graphic designers should need to be challenged. I think they welcome being challenged more than a lot of other professions might. A good designer welcomes being challenged. So this issue is particularly good too, because I was really interested in the Stijlik redesign, which was done this year as well, I think. Seems like a long time ago, but it probably was just earlier this year. And that was by Mevis and Van Dersen, after a very controversial sort of commissioning process by the museum. And, the actual identity was years in the making, and then it was scrapped, and then these guys came in and sort of whipped one up really quickly. And it was interesting to see how it's evolved, and great, really timely for idpure to be putting that in. They also devote a section at the back for typography, and in the recent issue they typeset the whole article in the typeface they were talking about, which I really liked. It gave it sort of a extra dimension to the sort of monotone design that they generally have. It's monotone, but again, like this, they sort of throw really surprising elements in. So really interesting, like content-wise, what it should be. Design-wise, really throws you off, which I think is really healthy for a graphic design magazine. So that's idpure. We've got a sort of little raft of design magazines in this middle bit. Desktop Magazine is an Australian graphic design magazine. Here it's showing off the varnish. And it really came into its own in 2013 under the editorialship of Heath Killen, and with designer Hannah Lawless and then later Davin Lynn on board. Hannah, she really just took the magazine and gave it a huge overhaul, which it had needed for a long time. One of the things I also think a graphic design should have is an element of change and of evolution, so it was great to see that built into the actual design of the magazine. And really lovely use of Chris Salisbury's typefaces as well. And lots of surprising things that hadn't happened in desktop for a while. You can see this is what the magazine used to look like. That's a long time ago. And that was like, it did start off as like a desktop publishing magazine, so it was really techy, but it's, as soon as desktop publishing, bottomed out as an actual profession, they moved into looking at more pure graphic design. It will, I hope, it's got a new editor at the helm too, who she again will, there's just been this line of really good editors, and the design is now actually caught up with the editorialship as well. And here's a couple of previous issues. There's a really nice thing where each cover had a special sort of thing done to it, so laser cutting or foils or varnishes, and that was really nice to see too. Oh, I'm getting a bit puffed. Not even halfway through. But yeah, this was this, you can see the quality of contributor 2 is really, I don't know, I think a lot of people hadn't heard of desktop before, particularly overseas, until this year, so you might not have realised what it used to be. It's just it's 110% what it used to be now, and I hope it just keeps on getting better and better. This is one I'm really excited about, and it's a bit of a last minute entry. Form was a really dour German design magazine, and it wasn't graphic design in particular. They covered graphic design, but they also covered a lot of other design. And there's not a lot of titles that spread themselves over the whole sort of design spectrum that actually sort of successful in representing all the different disciplines. And Form, it's still sort of a funny mixture, but they've redesigned with their 250th issue, and so the design references their history. They've been around for a long time, so they've sort of been through German modernism and all that sort of business. In doing that, I think they've also sort of refreshed the editorial angle as well. It's a much better read. It's bilingual, so you can read. There is English text there if you want to read it and you speak my language. I'm learning German. I'm not going to do a video thing in German though. That's just ridiculous. Yeah. So again, it's sort of mixing up all the graphic disciplines. I'm a graphic designer. I wanted to see more graphic design, but I was really happy with sort of reading about the process of design and that sort of really rigorous investigation into where design is heading in the future, and will there still be, will there be a need for graphic designers and that sort of business. I should mention who has redesigned this. He says, madly flicking through to find the colophon. Oh, there it is. So the art direction is by Michael Hyman and Hendrik Swantes. Said that completely wrong. And I don't know anything about them. I'm going to look them up. But they've done a really sterling job on bringing what even German designers I spoke to considered quite a boring magazine sort of up to date. I really like it. I think it's going to be one to watch. And sort of putting it instead for the next 250 issues, really. Surface is a magazine we spoke about in the previous video. It's had a massive sort of overhaul as well, both design and editorially. As far as editorial goes, I think it's just really, the sections have been just really tidied up. You sort of get short form articles at the front. There's no sort of tidbits. It's all just sort of images and sort of stuff you can read. That was funny too. That ad I think had an alternative cover in it, which actually was a bit better than the cover they had, sort of breaking up the one image head thing. One of the main problems with this redesign has been that the last 4 issues have just had like some old guy's head on the cover, which is really disrespectful of me to say that, but diversity might be a good idea, just saying. The fashion has changed a lot. It's always been a bit strange when a design and interiors and architecture magazine starts incorporating fashion. It's mostly done to generate income, like to get the big ads in. You look at wallpaper and the fashion has always sort of sat a bit strangely within the content, but it's sort of needed to help finance the magazine. That's just showing you that the layout for this section was based on the cover of a book, so they just sort of run with this idea of taking an existing design and adapting it over and over again, which is really interesting. I thought it was really well done, and it doesn't look uncharacteristic within the magazine. This too, I mentioned last time, I've included this because it's another magazine it's gone back to that really pared back aesthetic that seems really popular at the moment, like black and white, really plain text. But it hasn't tried to look like it's from the past. It actually looks quite clean, and there's something. I mean, I guess it's sort of Swiss modernism creeping in, but it doesn't feel that sort of dated. It doesn't feel dated at all. It feels really modern. I love too, they always have these sort of people at places thing at the back, which has always been a little bit dodgy, but the focus here now is on just really interesting, almost reportage style photography of people at events, and I think it's really working. I think the back section is just really lovely now, and worth sort of filling up, a big chunk of the magazine with. Midcentury. Hi. This was launched on the back of a series of sort of events that were held in London. They were sort of almost trade show type things where you'd go along and there'd be lots of sellers selling stuff that might be mid-century. Some of it was new, made to look mid-century and all sort of stuff. So the first version of this magazine came out and it was designed by Hyperkit. And I love Hyperkit's work, and I found the magazine really disappointing. I subscribed without seeing the first issue and didn't renew my subscription. I thought, this is just really disappointing. Simon Esselstyn, who designs iMagazine and helps publish it, has taken over. I think because he redid the 21st Century magazine recently, so there's like 20th Century Society magazine, C20. So there might be a connection there, but thank goodness. It actually is really good, and it's sort of the same content. The content's a little hokey in that it's put together by people that run fairs. It's not necessarily put together by, people who have worked on interior design magazines or anything like that. But the design has just lifted the content up so much. It's so much better. And it's really interesting, actually. I've seen this trend for just full bleed DPSs without any explanation or text or anything. That if you look at this video, like again, there's a few things. This happens quite a bit in magazines at the moment. This idea of just, I think maybe because text pages tend to be really dense these days, so that you can get away with just DPSs with no text whatsoever to balance it out. And the use of just full bleed images. I think that the small format lends itself to the full bleed, full color pages too. There's just something about it that's really neat. And there's the 20th Century Society. Their magazine is, it's a membership organisation, and they help preserve 20th century buildings and murals and stuff like that within the UK. So they were worth checking out too, and their magazine is really beautiful. Again, designed by Simon Esselstyn. I hope I'm saying that right, Simon. I really hope so. Whoa, so that was Midcentury. Do you know this one? You probably do. It's Nice That had a magazine called It's Nice That. And they recently, not recently, but towards the beginning of the year, they sort of redid it and it came out as printed pages. And the idea was to have something a bit more nimble, a bit more quick, a bit cheaper, like something that you could get in people's hands a lot quicker. And I think they've achieved it. I don't know what the figures are like or anything like that. Design-wise, I feel like they've achieved what they set out to do and make it a much more accessible. That was the key thing, making it accessible. And that's price points, that's content, that's design, that's everything. And it's been a really big turnaround. A really interesting team. The podcast too, if you want to know who's behind the magazine and the website, the podcast sort of has roundtables with the editors and the people that run It's Nice That, and it's actually really nice to sort of check out the blog, listen to the podcast, buy the magazine, and you get a really good overview of just the real dedication and passion to creative endeavour that is behind these publications and this organisation. This issue, it's designed, I should say, by Joseph Byrne and Philip Coronard. Oh, Jesus, my pronunciation is terrible, I tell you. And I have a feeling I looked them up, and they're sort of half London, half Amsterdam based. So there's a sort of Dutch connection there. And I think you can tell looking at the design. It's got that slight edge of experimental. I think there's like within Dutch design, if it feels like experimentation is encouraged or accepted, and there's a bit of, you can feel the spice of that in this magazine. The spice of it. What the heck? Oh dear. What else? Oh yeah, I just pointed this out because this is a cinema I used to go to a lot in London, and they're sort of bemoaning the fact that it's going to be stripped and redecorated, whatever. Terrible place. It had no aircon. In the summer you would just sweat. I'm really happy they're redeveloping it. The carpet was nice. It's it kind of needed a bit more love though. But bless them for reminiscing about a really crappy cinema that needed redoing. Printed pages, really good. Really was easy to get in Australia. That last issue you saw, it disappeared. I don't know why it didn't appear in the shops. So I don't know what's happened there. Distribution is really flaky in Australia at the moment. It's hard to know what magazines will arrive when. Driving me absolutely bonkers. Kaleidoscope. I don't have many issues, but I'd like more. It's a really... Yeah, I went away and did something and then came back. It's got a double cover. Now, a friend of mine who's an artist looked at this and was like, there's so many ads, and I pointed out, yeah, but they've put them all at the front and then put another cover in so that you don't, you can just like go straight to the content, which is really clever, a good way to negotiate having to put all the ads up the front. And actually, I don't mind loads of ads in art magazines because generally they're pretty well designed ads. It's for a graphic designer, the ads in an art magazine are just as good as the content for me. I really like going through them. So it's kind of nice to put them in their own section. This is the content section, which is great. It's called a summary, and it's just lots of blocks of information. There's so many sort of radical ideas, like layout-wise, in terms of editorially and graphically in Kaleidoscope. I worry that some people will see it as a bit gimmicky, some of the things they've done. Like this, for instance, slightly shorter pages. It's a portfolio of someone's work. So you get a black page talking about them, and then you get these slightly shorter pages that are trimmed down with just the work in it. That sort of thing I think is great. I worry because I reviewed Art Review last video, and it's really dry. I mean, I don't hate it, but it's super dry, and all the sort of any gimmicky stuff has just been stripped out. But I feel like it's lost. It's sort of gone back to when art magazines were just plates with black, bits of text next to them. This is so much richer, so much more interesting. It's designed by the guys who, I think they used to work for North and worked on the Barbican identity, and then spun themselves off into their own separate company, OKRM. Can I find the colophon? Of course I can. There it is. Yeah, OKRM, which is Oliver Knight and Rory McGrath. And everything they do is just turns to gold. They're just really a really strong graphic design team. I almost wish that they sort of broke out of sort of working for mostly art clients a bit more and took on some actual sort of big commercial clients. So they're probably not interested in that. They don't need to be. They're doing stuff like this, which is, I imagine, hugely sort of fulfilling. I don't know. It sounds a bit like I'm jealous. I am. I just really love the way this is laid out. I think it's really clever. You get to the back too, and it's Kaleidoscope does a good sort of goal. I'm pointing this out because that's probably, I'm going to do like top 13 films for the year, and that was my favourite film for the year. So judge me not. Francis Ha Film of the Year. More about that later on Linefeed.me. This is an example too of like how nice some of the ads you get in typical art magazines are, and this comes with like a little, every issue of Kaleidoscope comes with like a little insert, or it's always different, it's not always this sort of staple bound thing. There's so much to talk about Kaleidoscope. I feel like I didn't even touch on it at all. ID is here, and it's a big year for ID because it's the last, the founder and creative director Terry Jones has bowed out with this issue. This is the last issue where he is involved. Pretty much, it seems as though ID pretty much sold Terry Jones and the team at ID sold the title to Vice magazine in order to keep it alive, and so he could sort of retire. You know, time will tell whether that's worked out or not. Vice now have to sort of shoulder it on their own. This is like, so this is, it's really odd because ID is Terry Jones. They've had so many editors and art directors over the years. I mean, it's been around since, I think they launched in 1980. So that's, you know, that's a long time with lots of different people coming and going, and it's always been Terry Jones at the, you know, top of the masthead, supported by his wife Trisha, and I think even their kids sort of are photographers and contribute to the magazine. Lily McNamee. I think what they've, from what I can guess with this issue, they've, as it's sort of the last, you know, big hurrah, they sort of flip between time frames quite a lot. So here you see, this is a cover from a spread from a previous issue from like the 90s or something, and it's revisited. There's interviews with David Bailey with these amazing photography. They're just flitting backwards and forwards from the past to, you know, the current, and it's a real mash of time frames in this issue. And that seems really appropriate, you know, because it sort of relates to the history of ID magazine. And yeah, still doing the sort of edgy shoots as well. That was like a naked person. I think it's pixelated out, so this video does not contain nudity. That's all I'm saying. It's pixelated. Don't blame me. Yeah. And the other thing that's worth noting, and I think this is because of the connection with Vice, is that ID now has a new confusing website. I'm kind of enjoying it. I'm kind of confused by it. I find bits that I get stuck on and other bits I just cannot navigate through. Plus, they've also set up a YouTube channel and have been making quite a few videos, interesting sort of collaborations between musicians, models, and fashion labels, all sort of mixed in together, all funding each other to do interesting things. There's a really interesting funding model in terms of getting creative work done that's revolved around this new, you know, what's going to happen to ID with the Vice connection too. So yeah, thank you Terry Jones for all your work on ID magazine over the years, and I really hope that the new owners sort of live up to your amazing legacy. That sounds really sucky, but actually Terry Jones is probably one of the reasons why I decided that I liked magazines and wanted to design them. Which is why I'm showing you a couple of his books, which I totally recommend picking up. His personal philosophy is really interesting too. He talks about being a designer being like a visual editor, just constantly editing and having you get the impression he's got a really restless visual mind, you know, which is really interesting. It's a really different way to look at design. And the whole, he mentions in there's another book that I don't have on me that he mentions everyone is a designer in terms of everyone makes decisions and that design is based on decision making. So there's a really interesting philosophy behind that as well. This book is really rare. I've included a video, maybe I should do a link. I think I've got a video on my Vimeo channel of the content of this book, just it alone. It sort of was before computers sort of took over, but references sort of designing by computer as well. And it's what it says, a manual of graphic techniques. So it's ways to produce graphics you know, using unusual techniques like photocopiers and things like that. Really awesome book if you can get hold of it. The NME went through some changes this year. It was funny because it's been redesigned so many times that you'd think, I kind of assumed they'd redesign it again, no one would notice, but the guys who've worked on this one have done really well at sort of bringing it up to date, just completely modernizing it. It's art director Mark Neal who's in charge, and with his small team have just refreshed the whole magazine. It's funny though, now it looks all sort of up to date and refreshed. The sort of daggy old bits of content still, like Arctic Monkeys, seriously? You know, they're still clinging on to that. I bet there's Oasis in here somewhere, sort of hiding out. It's like, drop the dead donkeys, Jesus. You've got a fresh new design. Like, how about, you know, fresh new musicians as well? Stop clinging on to the dead carcasses of pop, of indie pop. I had to point out this is nice, and it's like what MIT Technology Review were doing. They include like an old issue, and they also have like some artist is sort of doing like their version of the NME cover. It's really funny. I really like it. So that's yay for reviving NME. I've started buying it again. I never thought that would happen. I hope they stick to their guns and just keep it modern looking. This is a magazine I've had an eye on for a while, and I was like, why haven't I featured this before? I really like it. This was a previous issue. This was to give you an idea of what it usually looks like. I think the design's changed a bit since this issue, but not hugely. The issue we're going to look at though in this video is a special pop issue, and they've sort of gone a bit crazy. Can you hear me flicking? I'm just looking up the art director. Creative director, sorry, Rob Myers, who runs RBPM Studio. I'm pretty sure he took what was a pretty ordinary music magazine and really just gave it a massive kick up the arse. And it's been sort of powering on ever since. Yeah, this pop issue is just deliriously amazing. It's just got these diamonds and hearts and bits of sort of references, sort of, you know, when you sort of bedazzle something in a GIF and stick it on your Facebook page or whatever. It feels like that. It's great. I really love it. And they've sort of, editorially, it's quite good too. They've not shied away from like Gary Barlow. I mean, what cool magazine would include Gary Barlow? It's just amazing that they've really gone to the heart of pop and just cut it out and slapped it on the pages. I don't think this is gonna, you know, instigate a massive pop revival or anything, but as an artifact, it's pretty darn awesome. And they talk about MTV, and it's almost a little mini history of pop in a lot of ways. They're ticking all the boxes, and the design is just so joyful, and like it's modern, but it's also sort of out there. Out there is a terrible term. I really wish I hadn't said it. I like the giant double-page quotes too, which could look really boring if they weren't designed so deliriously. Lovely work by Matt Maitland as well, illustrating Michael Jackson. So yeah, Clash is just... There's not a lot of music magazines left, you know. Oh yeah, and of course, what is a pop magazine without an actual fold-out poster that you can stick on your wall? So Pharrell Williams gets the honour of being the issue's fold-out poster. And they don't usually do fold-out posters. This is just for the pop issue, which makes so much sense. You know, if their aim was to sort of get people reminiscing about smash hits and stuff like that, then well done. I think that was a really awesome title. Now there's a few, that was 13 mags, which is loads, but there were some that almost made it in but not quite for various reasons. And here they are. Town, really good. I get London sick sometimes, so that was my personal sort of choice really. Miss Vogue, an Australian version of Vogue for younger women, that actually was loads better than the original version of Vogue and should probably take over. Frame, hugely expensive in Australia, but I could not resist buying it over and over again, so that was my guilty pleasure. Cat People, we saw in the last video, awesome for so many reasons. And Gather, which I mentioned earlier, one of the many food magazines that came out. Beautiful, beautiful photography, amazingly beautiful photography. Whew. So that's our 13 for 2013. I hope that was entertaining. It's a long video, this one. I'm really sorry. I could not work out how to make it any shorter without fitting less magazines in. The next one will be back to the usual format where we'll just look at sort of recent titles and yeah, it'll be, try and keep it to that half an hour thing. Half an hour is good, yeah? That's not asking too much of your life, is it? Maybe? Tell me, I don't know. I start talking now, it's time for the end bit where I do housekeeping. Okay, before I get on to the housekeeping bit I just mentioned, we have to do views. Not like I forgot, but maybe I did forget a bit. I get really excited doing the reviews chat. For views, I wanted to talk a little, just briefly, about digital publishing and introduce you to ReadyMag. 2013 saw a lot of confusion about what to call magazines or what things can be called magazines, which accumulated in Yahoo announcing they were going to do a series of, they didn't even say online magazines, they just said they're going to release these magazines, which I assume they mean websites. I don't think they actually mean printed pages, that would be quite bizarre. So I'm not sure if ReadyMag, like it might have made sense to have mag in their title when they started, but what ReadyMag actually is a really amazingly powerful layout engine. So I did a trial beta of ReadyMag, and it's just the interface is beautifully designed. It is a lot of work. I'm saying it's a lot of work. The interface is really easy, like everything's really easy to put together, but it sort of opens up all the sort of options you get when you're designing a page, except you haven't got all these sort of resources to pull on, to pull in, which you do, with a sort of print-based team of people working on a magazine. It's very solitary. I think that's what the main difference between, with producing magazines online is that it can be a very solitary experience. It sort of encourages that. It's sort of you and your computer sort of pulling all stuff together. It's not so much, it doesn't feel like, you've got a team around you as such, which is one of the unique things about working on a magazine, the fact that it's a combination of a certain amount of people that produce this sort of thing in the end. Obviously, magazine teams are getting smaller and smaller, and you do have people, sort of people that can produce a magazine all on their own, which is kind of a publishing revolution in itself, really. But there is something lost in the idea of working together, collecting sort of content and designing stuff together in order to put it, send it out to print. That is a lot different from sitting, sort of putting something together on your computer. So ReadyMag gives you all the tools to be able to sort of put stuff, articles and images and stuff together for yourself. It essentially builds a sort of mini website for you. Everything about it I can recommend, except the sort of pricing. And it's really, I found it really hard to say this because you look at it and you know that there's this huge amount of work that's gone into making the interface so good and to make it so attractive. And there's no doubt that the value that they have put on their product equals the amount of time and energy put into it. But coming at it as a publisher, it doesn't make sense. It's quite expensive just to put what seems to be just some random articles online. There is a really good example. I think I'll put a picture or something up on here of someone who has done a magazine style ReadyMag publication, which works really well. But I found that I wanted to do articles. I didn't want to do. It sort of lets you make different magazines, but what I wanted to do is make different articles that people could sift through, not put them all into the one sort of document or file. That could be actually where the value is, in which case the pricing will have to change, because if you go from making a series of magazines to making a series of articles, you know, that fit within a website, suddenly you're charging for the whole thing rather than each individual file. But I would say check out ReadyMag. It's a really interesting, it's sort of a challenge to publishing. There's going to be more and more of this sort of stuff coming up. There's already been sort of similar publishing challenges that have fallen by the wayside. ReadyMag could be here to stay if they get just a few things sort of sorted out, and one is going to unfortunately have to be pricing. So it's readymag.com. Have a look and give them feedback. I think it's something that's worth feeding back into, if you know, something that could grow into something really useful and helpful. So totally give them feedback. So yeah, readymag.com. So that's views over, and that's this video over for another couple of months. The next one, I promise, I'll try and keep it under half an hour. This one was a special edition for 2013, so I hope you bared with it and it wasn't too much of a trial. I'm going to say goodbye. I just want to say thank you though to magpile.com for a start. They're going to be doing their 2013 magazine awards soon, so keep an eye out on that. As always, magculture.com, always worth a visit. Plus our previous sponsors, sort of sponsors, they're not sponsors actually, they were supporters, that's a better term. Stack Magazines, and that's again stackmagazines.com. So yeah, visit them often, and also visit us at linefeed.me, or check out our Twitter feed, which is Linefeed. And again, as always, thanks for stopping by, and see you in a couple of months.